الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. And continuing with our discussion about the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the dua that he made, Allahumma inni as'aluka, Allahumma bi'ilmika al-ghayb wa qudratika ala al-khalq. O Allah, by your knowledge of the unseen and your power over your creation, inni as'alu Allahumma bi'ilmika al-ghayb wa qudratika ala al-khalq. أحيني ما علمت الحياة خير لي وتوفني ما كانت الوفاة خير لي. O Allah, I ask you by your knowledge of the unseen and your power over your creation to give me life so as long as life is, that you know that life is more beneficial for me, and to take my life so as long as you know that death is better for me. All right, and we discussed the meanings behind these first few lines of this dua. As I mentioned before, there's a total of 13 lines attached to this dua, and each line is filled with so many fawaid, so many benefit, ocean of knowledge in each and every line. And we covered the first line, and that is أحيني ما علمت الحياة خير لي وتوفني إذا كانت الوفاة خير لي. Oh Allah, give me life so as long as life is better for me, so as long as you know that life is better for me, and take my life so as long as you know that death is better for me. There are some people that death is better for them than living, and we explained that means if living is going to be a trial and a tribulation for you in your religion that may possibly cause you to apostate from Islam. Any trial or tribulation that may test you in your religion to the point where you feel like you don't want to be Muslim anymore, you want to leave your religion, then obviously in a situation like that, death would be better for the person. To die as a Muslim, to die as a believer is better than living teetering on disbelief, teetering on hypocrisy, and the opposite is the same. If living is better for you than death, meaning if I die right now, then that's going to cut off all of my deeds and I'm not really ready to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then living might be better for me. As the scholars mention, لَيْسَ كُلَّ مَوْتٍ رَاحَةً لَيْسَ كُلَّ مَوْتٍ رَاحَةً, that not every death is peaceful. We say all the time, rest in peace, but not everybody's death is peaceful. So for some people, death might be moving from one punishment in this life to a greater punishment in the hereafter, which is the punishment of the grave. So to stay alive and to maintain and to preserve your life, for some people might be better for them because it gives them an opportunity to repent, gives them an opportunity to make it right with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We come to the third line from this hadith, and that is his next statement, Allahumma inni as'aluka khashyataka fil ghaybi wa shahada. Oh Allah, I ask you for your khashya, your fear. I ask you for fear of you fil ghaybi wa shahada, in open and in secret, in public and in private. To ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for fear of him in public and in private. And as Al-Manawi mentioned, the meaning of the word khashya is synonymous with the word khawf. Although some scholars say that khashya is based upon knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and khawf is just a fear that a person has, a natural fear that a person have, and may not necessarily be connected to any form of knowledge. But khashya is based upon knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As Manawi, he said, the word khashya, it means ta'allum al-qalb. Ta'allam al-qalb, ta'allam al-qalb. Ta, alif, lam, mim, comes from the word alam. Alam, which means to hurt, to feel pain. Ta'allum al-qalb is for the pain to feel, for the heart to feel pain, right? Litawaqqa' makruh, to heart to feel pain because of some matter, some unfavorable matter that is going to befall them. Mustaqbilan, in the future. To feel pain, your heart to feel pain because of some matter that may happen in the future. يكون تارة بكثرة الجناية من العبد. Sometimes this could be because of the multitude of sins that the servant commits, and he's in fear of what's going to happen to him or her later on when they meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they feel this pain in their heart. And this is khashya. This is fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As we're going to talk a little bit more about, when a person sins, does that mean that they don't fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? If a person commits sin, does that mean that they absolutely don't fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And sometimes we may think that those two things are connected. We may say, well, you're sinning, you obviously don't fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because a person engages in a sin may not necessarily mean that he doesn't or she doesn't fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we'll talk about that more. But تألم القلب لتوقع مكروه مستقبلا. It's the heart to feel pain because of some fear that they have of some future catastrophe based upon either some sins that they have committed, أو تارة بمعرفة بجلال الله جل وعلا وهيبته. And sometimes it's as a result of just your glorification and your magnification of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Your hayba, your fear, being in awe of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Being in awe of Allah and understanding His magnificence subhanahu wa ta'ala. So sometimes a person can have khashya can have fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because of the punishment that he knows that is waiting for him or her because of the sins they have committed, as that is a way that a person may develop fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're in fear, they're scared. They're scared of what is awaiting them because of the sins that they know that they have committed. All right? Like the example that I gave before of the man who committed suicide, the man who cremated himself, right? And then he told his family to spread my ashes over the ocean, right? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala caused the ocean to gather all of his ashes together. And when he gathered the ashes together, brought his body back to the way that it was, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala questioned him and asked him, why did you do this? Why did you cremate yourself and have your family spread your ashes across the ocean? And the man said, I did this, Ya Rab, min khashyatik, out of fear of you. Out of fear. Khashyatan an la taghfirli, out of fear that you wouldn't forgive me. This person has fear of Allah because of the sins that he or she has committed. So, sometimes we may totally dismiss a person because they may have fallen victim to this sin or that sin, and we may dismiss the person as someone who doesn't fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You don't fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But in fact, it may be because of your sins that you do have a fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm not saying that at the time that the person is engaging in the sin that they are in fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but when a person comes to, right, his consciousness, he regains consciousness from whatever, clouded judgment or clouded perception that they had at the time that they were engaging in the sin, when they come to, right, and they regain their consciousness, right? As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَإِذَا هُمْ مُبْصِرُونَ, that, when they seek Allah's forgiveness from their sins, فَإِذَا هُمْ مُبْصِرُونَ, now they can see aright. They can see straight now. Their judgment is no longer cloudy. Their judgment is no longer, compromised. And they can see clear. That fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts to set in. It starts to set in. Because they know that they have engaged in acts that they are going to be accountable before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for. And this is a means by which a person may develop khashya, fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Manawi, he said, Taratan يكون تارة بكثرة الجناية من العبد. Sometimes it's as a result of the servant realizing how many sins that he or she has committed, and that they know that this punishment for those sins is waiting for them in the future. And sometimes تارة بمعرفة بجلال الله جل وعلا وهيبته. And sometimes it's just as a result of a person recognizing the magnificence and the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as a result of that, they develop fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وقد سمى العلماء أن هذا من المنجيات الثلاث. That the Prophet ﷺ in this portion of the dua, he said, Allahumma inni as'aluka khashyataka fil ghaybi wa shahada. Allahumma inni as'aluka khashyataka fil ghaybi wa shahada. Oh Allah, I ask you for fear of you fil ghaybi, in secret, wa shahada, and in public and in private. All right? So we dealt with, the meaning of the word khashya. The scholars, they call this dua, or asking for this thing in particular, which is khashyat Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, fear of Allah, asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for his fear. This is what is known as al-munjiyat al-thalath. 3 things that will make you successful in this life. 3 things that will make you successful in this life. Al-munjiyat al-thalath. 3 things. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned in a hadith. He said, وَقَدْ جَاءَ فِي حَدِيث ثَلَاثَ مُهْلِكَاتٍ وَثَلَاثٌ مُنْجِيَاتٍ. There are 3 things that will destroy you and 3 things that will give you success. Pay attention to this hadith. 3 things. ثَلَاثَ مُهْلِكَاتٍ وَثَلَاثٌ مُنْجِيَاتٍ. 3 things that will destroy you, ultimately will destroy you, and 3 things that will give you success. Al-muhlikat, things that will destroy you. Wa-munjiyat, and 3 things that will give you success. He said, thalatha muhlikat, the 3 things that will destroy you. Shuhun muta'. Shuhun muta'un is to be extremely stingy. So much so that you follow your stinginess. That whenever you are afraid of losing money, or afraid of losing something, right, then you obey that. You follow that. So if you're in fear, like you don't want to give someone your time, then you obey that impulse at that moment. When you are afraid of losing something, you obey your desire in that particular thing. Shuhun muta'. You become extremely stingy with everything. With your time, with your money, right? With your nasiha, with your advice. You become extremely stingy with everything. So when you don't want to lose something, then you obey your impulse at that moment. Will destroy you. Stinginess and everything will destroy you. He said, وَهَوًا مُتَّبَعٍ, and following your desire in everything. Following your desire now becomes your navigation in everything. Will destroy you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, every time he mentions hawa, every time he mentions desires in the Quran, it's always in a negative way. Hawa, following your desires, your impulses will never bring you any good. Hence the fact we have revelation. Hawa muttaba', that you follow your every desire in everything. You never look at the Quran, you never look at the Sunnah, you never try to find out what does Allah say, what does His Messenger say in this particular aspect or in this particular endeavor. You just completely follow your desire. Those type of people who you say that you're always scratching your head and you're like, Dad, don't you ever ask for advice? Don't you ever make any decisions based upon what Allah said, His Messenger said? Is everything that you do totally based upon impulse? Everything? Not one decision in your life do you ever stop and go back and say, let me see what Allah says, let me see what His Messenger say. Everything that you do in your life is mustanid, is connected to an impulse. Hawan muttaba'. You follow your desire in everything. You're stingy in everything, you follow your desire in everything. And the last one, i'jabul mar' bi nafsihi, is to become self-deluded, believing that you have the answers to everything. I'jab al-mar'u bi nafsi, you become so amazed with yourself. Self-aggrandizement, right? Everything is all about you, right? Conversations is about you. Decisions is about you. Everything is about you. You become narcissistic. That's the term that we have in the modern, vernacular, right? You become narcissistic. I'jab al-mar'u bi nafsi, that you become so obsessed with your own self. So obsessed with your own self. Everything is all about you. And if you can see in these three things are muhlikat, are destructive sins, not because of the sin itself, but because of the extreme, the intensity of it. Right? You're stingy in everything and with everything. Right? Even in things that, and sometimes this could be because of some of the environments that we grow up in. We're just stingy with everything. We're stingy with everything. Not just time, money, material possessions, everything. We got to get ours out the top, and we're not sharing with nobody. Everything. And a lot of times this may be because people grew up in environments where, maybe they didn't have much. And then when they finally do get, or when opportunities present themselves, they seize the opportunity and they don't care about anybody but themselves. You're extremely stingy with everything. And believe it or not, these are things that destroy marriages as well. These are the same three things, not just destroy you as an individual in your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or destroy any type of success or felicity you could have had in this life, but it also destroys your relationships with other people. Have you ever think about the connection between that? The things that destroy your relationship with Allah is usually the same things that destroy your relationship with people. Right? You see the connection between the two? Which is why some of the scholars, they say, أَصْلِحْ مَا بَيْنَكَ وَبَيْنَ اللَّهِ أَصْلَحَ اللَّهُ مَا بَيْنَكَ وَبَيْنَ النَّاسِ. Rectify your relationship between you and Allah will rectify your relationship between you and people. You see the connection? You see how those two are just connected? That it's impossible for you to have a poor relationship with Allah and a great relationship with people. It just doesn't work like that. Because our relationship with one another is an extension of our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if you look at these three things, they not only destroy your success in this life, they also destroy your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well as with other people. You become extremely stingy with everything. Nobody likes a hoarder. Nobody likes somebody who's you don't even want to be around somebody, right? They penny pinch with every single thing, right? You go in the store and you say, he says, you want some, you guys want something from the store? All right, everybody give me your money. It's like, you offered to go in the store and buy somebody something, then you should purchase it. But, they nitpick with everything. There's the type of people you go to lunch with them and they look at the bill once the bill come in and they only want to pay for what they ordered. Right? As opposed to saying, well, we ate together, let's just split the bill. We shared a moment of eating the food together, let's share the responsibility in that, right? But they're stingy with everything, not just money, with time, with everything, right? So, thalatha muhlikat, three things that will destroy you, three destructive sins that will destroy you, right? Number one is shuhun muta', is to be extremely stingy. Number two, hawan muttaba', is that you follow your desires and your impulse in everything. Right? In everything. You never look at the Quran and the Sunnah in terms of how do you navigate through this problem or that problem or this endeavor or that endeavor. The Quran and the Sunnah is the last thing on your mind. Right? It's always your desire that is the navigation. Right? And the last one, i'jabul mar' bi nafsihi, is that you become, self-obsessed. You become obsessed with yourself to such a degree that life and everything in it becomes about you. No one likes to be around a narcissist except another narcissist. Which I really don't even know how they could have a conversation with each other. You ever seen two narcissists have a conversation with each other? They would end up talking to themselves, because that's what a narcissist is doing. He's talking to himself about himself. Even when there's other people around, the conversation is about him, and he's talking to everybody, but no one's really listening because they get tired of hearing a person talk about themselves, so they're talking about themselves to themselves. وَالثَّلَاثُ مُنْجِيَاتٍ, and three successful things, three things that will give you success. So the Prophet ﷺ talked about three things that will destroy you, and destroy your relationship with Allah, destroy your relationship with other people, right? Try being married to a narcissist, right? Some people, already know what that feels like. Being married to someone who every decision in the family, every move that is made, every money that is spent, everything that is done in the interest of that individual. In the interest of that individual. Wife wants to go do this, not really feeling I don't really want to go. But when it comes time to do something that he wants to do or she wants to do, they're all in it. because it's about them, right? It's about them. Don't really have much of a conversation unless the conversation is about them. Wife praises him for something or says something nice, then that's the only time he wants to engage in the conversation. Other than that, doesn't really have much to say, because if the conversation is not on him or her, they don't really have a long drawn out conversation. It destroys your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it also destroys your relationship with other people. Thalathu munjiyat, 3 things that will grant you success, 3 things that will give you, a successful life. Number 1, khashyatullahi fil ghaybi wa shahada, to fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in public and in private. To fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in public and in private. Or in another narration, khashyatullahi fil sirri wa alaniya, in secret and in public, meaning when you are around other people and when you are alone by yourself. When you are alone by yourself and when you are around other people. وَالْقَسْطُ فِي الْغِنَى وَالْفَقْرِ, and the other 2 that we're going to mention are actually covered in this dua. Right? Which is why the scholars say that this is the start of asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the 3 things that will give you success. ثَلَاثُ مُنْجِيَاتٍ. The Prophet ﷺ combined all 3 of those things in one dua. In one dua. So the first thing that will give you success is fearing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in public and in private, and when you are with people and when you are alone. Number 2, al-qasdu fil ghina wal faqr. To be fair in your giving of sadaqah when you are broke and when you have money. Some people think that when they are broke, that they don't have to give much because they're broke. And some people think that because they're rich, they don't have to give much either. But you take a middle course between the 2, that you give. But you be fair in your giving. Al-qasdu fil faqr wal ghina. Al-adl. And number 3, kalimatul haqq fil rida wal ghadab, is to be able to say the truth whether you are pleased with the person or you are angry and upset with the person. Alright? Being able to speak truth to power, whether you are pleased with the person or displeased with the person. Usually, the only time that we can actually say the truth to someone is when we're angry with them, right? When we're angry with someone, or we can tell you the truth about yourself all day long. But when we're, pleased with the person, when everything is going good, we find it difficult in ourselves to say something truthful that needs to be said about the person, because we're in fear of ruining a relationship. We're in fear of putting ourselves at odds with the person. Things are kind of going good, right? But truth is truth. Al-haq wa haqq al-aqul. Truth is truth, and truth needs to be said whether you are pleased with the person or you are displeased with the person. So asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give you a perpetual state of fear of Him, whether in public or in private. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praised in the Quran those who fear Him in private in many verses. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَخْشَوْنَ رَبَّهُمْ بِالْغَيْبِ لَهُمْ مَغْفِرَةٌ وَأَجْرٌ كَبِيرٌ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, indeed, those who fear Him in secret. And notice Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts the concentration on fearing Him in secret. Alright, when you are alone, when you are in private. Because everybody knows how to put on game face when you come around other Muslims. Everybody knows how to do that. Everybody knows how to play the role of pious, righteous Muslim, I fear Allah, when we're around other Muslims. Right? Everybody knows how to do that. Which is why the emphasis in the Quran and the Sunnah is not on fearing Allah in public. Because people usually know how to do that. But it's the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when no one else is around. When no one else is around. When we get into environments where we don't see no other Muslims and we can kind of do us. Right? In workplaces and in other places where we think that there are people that don't know us. Or people who don't really share our religion, so we can kind of just do us. Right? You ever start a job and you see a Muslim who has been on that particular job for years. Right? And nobody on the job knows that the person is even Muslim. Right? You start working there, you know the person from neighborhood, or you know the person from just being Muslim, and you start working at the same job and you're like, Assalamu alaikum, and people looking at you like, Assalamu alaikum, he's Muslim? He's been working here for 10 years. We never even knew he was Muslim. We never even knew she was Muslim. She never wore hijab. She flirts with the men. She wears tight clothes. She wears heavy perfume. We didn't even know this person was Muslim, right? Because we're in an environment where we think that nobody knows us. We're in an environment where we think we're in private, right? And we can kind of just do us. But to fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fil ghaybi wa shahada, fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in private and in public. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَخْشَوْنَ رَبَّهُمْ بِالْغَيْبِ, those who fear Allah bil ghayb, in private, in secrecy, right? لَهُمْ مَغْفِرَةٌ, for them is forgiveness, وَأَجْرٌ كَبِيرٌ, and a huge reward, a major, magnificent reward. All right? Things that will assist you in fearing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The scholars mention 3 things that will help you develop khashya to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on your own. All right? The fact that we have to ask Allah to help us fear Him shows you the need, shows you the human need, and it also shows you the human deficiency in that. The fact that we have to ask Allah for fear of Him. All right? Meaning that it doesn't just come automatically because you're a Muslim. Right? I fear Allah. That is something, that is a process that you work on. That's not something that is given to you automatically because you're a Muslim or because you hang around people that appear to be righteous, right? As we said before. You know, that's not just given to you automatically. That's a personal initiative that you have to undertake, starting with asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for it. All right? So the fact that we have to ask Allah for fear of Him shows you, number 1, the need for it, right? And number 2, it shows you that we lack this quality. Otherwise, we wouldn't have to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for it. And we lack fear of Allah, each one of us on a different level. Each one of us on a different level. Nobody should be arrogant enough to say, I fear Allah. Right? We all have some deficiency in that, in doing that. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to increase us in it. Allahumma inni as'aluka khashyataka fil ghaybi wa shahada. Oh Allah, I ask you for the fear of you, whether in public or in private. The scholars mention 3 things that you can do on your own that would help you develop or build your fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Number 1, قوة الإيمان بوعده ووعيده على المعاصي, is having strong faith about the threats and the promises that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes for those who engage in sin. Sincerely believing that if I do this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to punish me for that. And I believe that. I believe that if I do this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has threatened in the Quran. He has made promises in the Quran that those who do this, those who do that, He's going to do this to them. And I truly believe that. I believe that. قوة الإيمان بوعده ووعيده على المعاصي. To strengthen your iman, your faith, your belief, and the threats and the promises that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes in the Quran about certain sins, right? Certain sins. So when you find people engaging in, sins, and I don't have to go into the sins that we all know that you find Muslims engaging in those sins, but you have to increase your belief in the threats and the promises that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made about those who engage in those sins. I believe in that. I believe that if Allah says He's going to punish somebody for doing this or doing that, I believe that. All right. Number 2, another في شدة بطشه سبحانه وتعالى إن بطش ربك لشديد وانتقامه وقوته وقهره. Number 2 is looking at how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala seized nations and people that came before you, and how heavy the hand of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in seizing people for doing some of the same sins that we engage in. And it may not even necessarily be the major sins that we all are familiar with: zina, riba, fornication, adultery, drinking, gambling, but even other sins, the more indiscreet, the more minor sins that become major sins because we engage in them so frequently, or because we don't really see them to be a big deal. right? But look at the batsh of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how Allah sees his people. He sees the whole nation of people for engaging in the acts of people of Lut. Sees the whole nation of people. جَعَلَ عَالِيَهَا سَافِلَهَا وَأَمْطَرْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ حِجَارَةً مِّن طِينٍ. That he made the bottom of their city the top of the city, flipped the city upside down, and then rained down on that city brimstone. Punished them with a double punishment. The only nation of people that have ever been punished with a double punishment. Inna batasha rabbika lashadid. Indeed, the seizing of your Lord is severe. Look at the nations. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees Bani Israel for, multitudinous atrocities that they engaged in. A lot of it didn't have to do with, major sins that we think of. Like, them, changing the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran that we said, don't say ra'ina wa qul unzurna wasma'u. And, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and don't say this. And then they changed the word, they played around with the word, and they said something similar to it, but it carried the same meaning of the word that Allah told them not to say. Right? So they kind of teetered on haram, right? Teetering on haram. Like, we may not engage in something that is particularly haram, but we teeter on those things. We teeter on those things. And teetering on the haram is from the actions of Bani Israel. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told them, do not fish on the Sabbath. Don't fish on the Sabbath, which was their holy day, Saturday. Don't fish on the Sabbath. Right? So what did they do? They put their nets in the water Friday night. So the nets caught the fish. So when they came on Sunday, they already had fish. And then they said, well, we didn't fish on the Sabbath. Right? You teeter on haram. You teeter on the haram. Right? So it may not, don't get in a habit of thinking when we're talking about fearing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we're talking about just staying away from major sins, but we're talking about minor sins that could be major sins because you're teetering on major sin. Alright, teetering, the mentality that is behind it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told Bani Israel to slaughter a cow. Right? And they said, well, what color should the cow be? Should the cow be a male or female? Should the cow be domesticated or other or wild? What kind of, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَذَبَحُوهَا فَمَا كَادُوا يَفْعَلُونَ. Finally, they slaughtered it and they almost didn't do it. Alright, this is where we are. Like, is it halal or haram? Alright, well, if enough people tell me it's haram, then maybe I'll stop. Right? We go to this sheikh and we say, sheikh, is this haram? Sheikh says, yes, that's haram. Go to the student of knowledge, is this haram? Yes, haram. Go to this person, is it haram? Yeah, it's haram. Then finally you come to the realization that this joint is haram. Eventually I'll stop. Right? But you had to be convinced by 20 different people in order for you to accept that the thing is haram. How many people you going to ask, is it haram? We throw these, loaded questions out. Brother, I have a question to ask. Is this permissible because I heard this sheikh say this and this sheikh say that? You ain't heard nobody say nothing. You ain't hear no sheikh say nothing. But you're asking the question and you throw the opposition out there. The opposition out there just to see if the person is going to incline towards that or not. Right? So we'll say, well, I heard this particular sheikh say that. And, in hopes that the person might be scared to go against that because a sheikh said it. I don't care if a sheikh said it. If it's haram, it's haram. I'm going to tell you it's haram. I don't care if no sheikh said, this particular sheikh, well, Sheikh Fawzan said this, or Sheikh Fulan said this, and we'll throw a name out there. Boy, I was reading that this sheikh said it was permissible. Now, I wouldn't care if 1,000 sheikhs told you it was permissible. If it's haram, it's haram, and I'm going to tell you it's haram. I don't care how many sheikhs told you it's permissible. It's haram. My Jews. If it's halal, it's halal. I don't care how many sheikhs said it's haram. And in the world of fiqh, even ijma', even sometimes jam'un min al-ulama qad aftaw bikadha. Sometimes you'll hear in the books of fiqh that a group from amongst the scholars or ijma' ala hadha, or they have a consensus on this particular issue. But that doesn't always mean the consensus doesn't always mean that it's right. It doesn't always mean this is right. A jamhur al-ulama ala kadha wa kadha wa kadha. It doesn't always mean that it's right. This is not about, this is not a democracy, how many people voted against it or voted for it or took this position or took that position. Haqq is haqq and is based upon dalil. Quwwat dalil or quwwat istidlal. The strength of the dalil, the strength of the evidence, not how many people see this as evidence. We teeter on haram. We teeter on haram on so many occasions, in so many spheres, in so many realms. We teeter on haram. And we never stop to think that maybe me teetering on this haram actually makes it a major sin, man. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't deal with Bani Israel in a light manner, even though some of the things that they were doing weren't necessarily major, but it was the sneakiness around what He was commanding them to do and how they tried to avoid it, how they tried to circumvent doing what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded them. And wallah al-azim, we do the same thing. We do the same exact thing. We don't want to fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so we go to this imam because we know that we have a connection with this imam and he's going to kind of give us a fatwa, or give us a response that kind of coincides with our desires. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a man came to him and said, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to him, "Jitta li tas'al an bir," you came to ask me about righteousness. He said, "Istafti qalbak," ask your heart. He said, righteousness is that which the heart finds tranquility in. You find peace in it when you do it. He said, was sin, wal itham ma haka fi nafs. He said, and sin is what wavers in the chest. You feel bad about it. Wa karihta an yattari'a alayhi an-nas, and you feel, you don't want people to find out about it. He said, wa in aftawka an-nas, even if all of the people tell you it's okay. Even if everybody tells you it's okay. You know that it's haram. You know that it's wrong. Even if everybody say it's okay. So we kind of teeter on haram in so many different, realms and so many different areas. It's important that we don't make a small sin a major sin because of how we try to circumvent doing what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us to do, or staying away from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded us to stay away from. So number 2, from the ways to help you develop khushu' or khashya, fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, another ila shiddati batshihi subhanahu wa ta'ala, looking at how severe the seizing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is of a people or a person who transgresses against His boundaries. And number 3, قوة مراقبة الله جل وعلا والعلم بأنه شاهد ورقيب على قلوب عباده وأعماله وأنه سبحانه وتعالى معهم حيثما كانوا. Number 3, from the ways to help you develop khashya, fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is being, uber aware of the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching you. Being uber aware, extremely aware and cognizant of the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching you. Watching your every move, your every statement. Alright, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raqibun ala qulubi ibadihi wa a'malihim, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is well aware of what is in the heart of His servants and what is in their actions, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with you no matter where you go. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam warned those who hide under the garment of piety, right, in front of people, and when they are alone with the limits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they transgress. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam warned people about this. Alright? People who, they hide under the garment of piety and righteousness, and they fear Allah, and they would never transgress against the boundaries of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in public, but in private, you're a whole different person. In private, you're a whole different person. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam warned us about that. And he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as was mentioned in hadith collected in the Sunnah of Ibn Majah, قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لأعلمن أقواما من أمتي لأعلمن أقواما من أمتي يأتون يوم القيامة بحسنات أمثال الجبال تهامة بيضاء فجعلها الله سبحانه وتعالى هباء منثورا. فقال ثوبان يا رسول الله صفهم لنا جليهم لنا أن لا نكون منهم ونحن لا نعلم. The Prophet ﷺ said, لَأَعْلَمَنَّ أَقْوَامًا, I without a doubt know people people, أقواما من أمتي, from my ummah. Ummah istijaba, la ummah da'wah. Ummah istijaba, as I said before, the word ummah carries two meanings. It could mean ummah ad-da'wah. It could mean everybody, including non-Muslims, that the Prophet ﷺ was sent to. Meaning from the time that he emerged as a prophet, then ummah ad-da'wah, everybody that lives after that, they are considered from his ummah, meaning from his era, his time, he's the last prophet, so from his emergence as a prophet all the way up until Yawm al-Qiyamah, all of those people are known as his ummah, ummah da'wah, people that he was sent to, and that was all of mankind. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا كَافَّةً لِلنَّاسِ, we all have not sent you except to all of mankind. So they are considered his ummah. And then there's Ummat al-Istijaba, those who responded to the da'wah of the Prophet ﷺ, meaning the Muslims. So sometimes in certain texts, depending on the context, right, of the word ummah, it could mean everybody that he was sent to from the time that he emerged as a prophet all the way up until Yawm al-Qiyamah. And sometimes it could only refer to the Muslims, those who responded to his da'wah. So here in this hadith, when he used the word ummah, he's talking about the Muslims, those who responded to his da'wah. He said, لَأَعْلَمَنَّ أَقْوَامًا مِنْ أُمَّتِي. He said, I know people from my ummah. From my ummah. يَأْتُونَ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ بِحَسَنَاتٍ أَمْثَالِ الْجِبَالِ التِّهَامَ بَيْضَاء. That will come on the day of judgment with mountains of hasanat. Mountains of good deeds the size of white mountains. Amthal al-jibal, they will come with heaps of good deeds the size of the white mountains. وَجَعَلَهَا اللَّهُ سُبْحَانَهُ وَتَعَالَى هَبَاءً مَنْثُورًا. And Allah will take those same mountains of good deeds and turn them into floating dust particles. They will measure up to nothing. They will weigh nothing. They will have mountains of good deeds, and those good deeds will not amount to anything. جَعَلَهَا هَبَاءً مَنْثُورًا, will make them as floating dust particles, meaning they will weigh nothing. They will weigh nothing. Who were these people? The Sahaba radiallahu anhum, whenever the Prophet ﷺ would ask questions like, or make comments like this, this is a teaching method, right? This is a strategy that the Prophet ﷺ used to use to get people's attention, right? To get their attention. That I know people from my ummah. So now when you say from your ummah, everybody's looking like, well, who is he referring to? Who will come on the day of judgment with heaps, with mountains of good deeds. So everybody's like, okay. And Allah will make those mountains like floating dust. So it's like taking you on this emotional, spiritual roller coaster. All to get your attention. To get your attention, to show you, to emphasize the importance of what he is getting ready to say. I know people from my ummah who will come on the day of judgment with mountains of hasanat, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make those mountains of deeds like floating dust particles. So one of his companions by the name of Thawban, he said, Ya Rasulullah, sifhum lana, describe them to us, tell us who these people are, so we can stay away from them, so we can avoid being like them, right? This is the whole purpose of mentioning the comment in that manner, structuring it like that. Right? So if you walked into a classroom as a teacher and you said, I know some of my students here in this classroom today, now you got everybody's attention because they know you're talking about them, somebody in that realm. Because if you say, I know somebody in this school, okay, somebody might not pay attention because the school might be huge, right? It's a huge school, and maybe it's not relevant to me. But when a teacher says, there is somebody in this classroom, right now you got everybody's attention. Who is going to pass the quiz, right? Now you got them. But they're going to pass the quiz with flying colors, but I'm still going to mark their paper with an F. Everybody's like, why? What would they do? Well, what did they do wrong? They want to know why, right? You've gotten all of their attention. It's a strategic method of teaching, right? Prophet ﷺ was an excellent, profound teacher. Profound teacher. So Thawban said to the Prophet ﷺ, Sifhum lana ya Rasulullah, describe these people to us. Who are they? Jalihim lana, أن لا نكون مثلهم أن لا نكون منهم ونحن لا نعلم. He said, describe them to us, explain to us who they are, make it clear for us who these people are so that we can avoid being amongst them while we don't even know. Perhaps we're doing something that we are a part of that group, so we want to kind of make sure that we are not a part of that group, so describe them to us. And the Prophet ﷺ, listen to what he said. He said, أَمَّا إِنَّهُمْ إِخْوَانُكُمْ مِنْ جِلْدَتِكُمْ. He said, they are your brothers, right? Your brothers. مِنْ جِلْدَتِكُمْ. يعني they are just like you, human beings just like you. وَيَأْخُذُونَ مِنَ اللَّيْلِ كَمَا تَأْخُذُونَ. And they have their share or their portion of the night just like you do, meaning they get up at night and they pray and they do what you do at night. وَلَكِنَّهُمْ أَقْوَامٌ إِذَا خَلَوْا بِمَحَارِمِ اللَّهِ انْتَهَكُوا. He said, but when they are alone, by themselves, out of the sight of people, they violate the limits that have been set by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They violate the limits that have been set by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're at the masjid for Jumu'ah. They hang out in front of the masjid with their thobe on. They got a beard. They always talking Quran, Sunnah, right? But then when they leave the masjid and go back to wherever they're from or wherever they at, they violate the limits that have been set by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they have done good deeds, as you can see. These are not people, right? These are not people that are just blatant sinners. These are people who intentionally do good deeds, but behind those good deeds, they have another face. They have another side to them. They have another side to them. All right? And unfortunately, with Facebook and Twitter and all of these other things, and I mean, yes, we should keep our sins to ourselves. We should engage in sin. If we are sinning, obviously we should not do that in public, right? We should keep that between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first and foremost. But if you engage in sin, then obviously you should keep that between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it doesn't mean that because a person sins and he tries to keep his sins or her sins out of the limelight of the people and between them and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that does not make them fall into this category. These are people who intentionally come out in front of the world as if, they're so pious and righteous, but then when they are alone, away from the eyes of the people, they are a whole nother person. They are a whole nother person. They violate the limits that have been set by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, question here, does this mean that a person who commits sin doesn't fear Allah? Going back to that question. Does it mean that because a person sins or falls into some acts of disobedience, does that mean that they don't fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Can we say emphatically that a person who sins does not fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Not necessarily. All right, we have to get out of this. He may not or she may not be fearing Allah at the time that they are engaged in that sin, obviously, which is why when a person commits zina, his iman leaves him, hovers over him, leaves him until he abandons that act, and then his iman, his faith returns to him, because there's no way that he can be a believer at the time that he is engaging in that sin. The Prophet ﷺ said that he is not a believer at the time that he is engaging in fornication and adultery. He is not a believer at the time that he is engaging in drinking khamr, drinking alcohol. So when you see the believers and they posting their pictures on Facebook, on Twitter, they got bottles in their hand, you popping bottles, you at the club, you doing this and that, you are not a believer at the time that you are engaging in that sin. Because there's no way that you could, and that doesn't mean that the person is a disbeliever. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. The hadith does not denote that when a person is engaging in that, he's a kafir or she's a kafir. That's not what it means. It means that at that time, their iman, their faith is at such a low point that their body can't even sustain, can't even maintain that iman. It has to hover. It has to come out of them and hover over them until they abandon that sin and come back, because the sin is so strong. It's the sin. The heart cannot maintain those two forces at the same time. Your heart cannot maintain those two forces at the same time. You can't be a complete believer in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and engage in a sin that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hates and that is going to punish you for at the same time. It's not going to be able to unite in the same heart. Not going to happen. So what happens? That sin, right, the power of that negative energy pushes the positive energy out. So much so that your iman hovers over you until you abandon that sin. Until you abandon that sin. All right, so we have to get out of this mode of thinking that because a person sins, that we just write them off. They don't fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Maybe not at the time that they were committing the sin, but that does not mean that because a person sins, right? Who from amongst us doesn't sin? It doesn't mean that because the person sins that they don't fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right, this is the mentality of the Khawarij, those who say that there's no such thing as a fluctuating iman. Faith does not fluctuate. You either have it or you don't have it. La wallahi, we don't say that. We believe that the iman, the belief of the believer, the iman, the faith of the believer, it fluctuates. It increases with obedience to Ar-Rahman and it decreases with obedience to Shaitan. We believe that is the belief of Ahlul Sunnah. But to say that iman does not fluctuate, it does not go down, up and down, that iman is shay'un wahid. One thing, either you have it or you don't have it, then this is the belief or the ideology that led the Khawarij to revolt against Islam, not just against the Sahaba, against Islam, killing some of the Sahaba, killing Uthman radiallahu ta'ala, killing Ali ibn Abi Talib. This is that energy that was responsible for killing them, because these were a people who refused to believe that a believer, right, could be a sinner at the same time. All right. عن أنس رضي الله عنه قال أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم دخل على شاب وهو في الموت فقال كيف تجدك. Very beautiful narration, and this will be probably the last point before we conclude here. Aisha radiallahu ta'ala, we're talking about a person sinning and still fearing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, still having some level or degree of fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or not necessarily at the time that he or she is engaging in the sin. Aisha radiallahu ta'ala, she said, دخل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم على شاب وهو في الموت. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam went to go visit a young man while he was on his deathbed. All right, and this wasn't the first time that he went to go visit someone, even non-Muslims. Even non-Muslims in the community, as we know the hadith of the young Jewish boy who the Prophet ﷺ went and visited him and told him, to say Shahada, La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah. And the young boy turned to his father, and the father said, Ati' Abul Qasim, obey Abu Qasim, meaning take your Shahada. Because they knew, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described them in the Quran, يَعْرِفُونَهُ كَمَا يَعْرِفُونَ أَبْنَاءَهُم. They knew the Prophet ﷺ was the Prophet of Allah, just like they knew their own children. They knew. It was arrogance that drove them not to accept the Prophet ﷺ as a prophet. So they didn't reject Islam because they didn't believe Islam was the truth. Just as today, they don't reject Islam because they don't believe it's the truth. They know it's the truth. They reject Islam, they reject the truth out of arrogance. As the Prophet ﷺ, he said, Al-kibru batrul haqq wa ghamtun nas. Kibr, arrogance, is rejecting the truth and looking down on people. So theirs is one of arrogance. Their issue is one of arrogance. All right? But the Prophet ﷺ went to go visit this young man, and he said to the young man, Kayfa tajiduk? How do you find yourself at this moment? How do you find yourself? Listen to this question. Dikkat an-nazar. Look deeply into this question. Wallahu al-azim, the speech of the Prophet ﷺ, it's like a sweetness. There's a ladha. There's a sweetness that is connected to the kalam, the speech of the Prophet ﷺ, the hiwar, the dialogue of the Prophet ﷺ with other people. Because when he opens his mouth and he's speaking, he's always angling somewhere. It's never just frivolous, fruitless speech. When the Prophet ﷺ opened his mouth, he was what they call rajulun hadafi. He was always goal-oriented. Anytime he opened his mouth, there was a goal somewhere he was angling for, right? For your benefit, for the benefit of the person, al-mukhatab, the person that he's speaking to, right? Whenever he opens his mouth, he's always angling, always trying to direct the person he's talking to something that is beneficial or better for them, right? In our time, we get tired of people like that being around us. Like, oh man, every time this dude come around, he always trying to impart some wisdom or some knowledge. Man, nobody want to hear all of that, right? We get tired of people like that being around us. And we want to be around people that talks a lot and ain't saying nothing, right? These are the type of people we want to be around all the time, right? Talk about a bunch of nonsense all the time, and they got our full and undivided attention talking about a bunch of bullcrap. But people who want to impart some knowledge to you, it's like, all right. We got it. We got the point. Like, you don't have to keep quoting ayahs and hadith. And I'm not saying that every time you come around a person, the conversation has to be religiously oriented, right? You can have general conversation, but the conversation should have an angle, should have a ghaya, should have a goal or an objective, not just having, frivolous conversation about nothing. Not just having frivolous conversation about nothing. I myself personally, I can only talk to a person for about 3 or 4 minutes if we not going somewhere with the conversation. It doesn't take that long to say, hey, how you doing? How's your family? Your kids? Everybody good? MashaAllah, tabarakallah. And that you can be done with that conversation in a minute. But if you want my undivided attention, we got to be going somewhere with this conversation. Conversation got to be going somewhere. I'm sorry. Or you lose me after like the first or second minute. Like, this ain't really working for me. And I'm kind of going to keep it moving, right? So the Prophet ﷺ asked him, Kayfa tajiduk? How do you find yourself at this moment? You're about to die. You're on your deathbed. You know you're about to die. Kayfa tajidu nafsik? How do you find yourself at this moment? And that's a question that all of us can ask ourselves right now at this point in your life. You don't have to wait until you're on your deathbed. The question of the Prophet ﷺ was very profound. And it's unfortunate that this young man had to receive that question at the time that he was on his deathbed. But I'm asking the question now, كيف تجد نفسك? كيف تجدك? How do you find yourself right now in your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How do you find yourself? That's a question that you can ask yourself right now. كيف تجدك? Profound question to ask somebody on their deathbed. Right? The Prophet it wasn't even like contrived. He didn't even like plot, like, I'm going to see this guy, let me figure out what I'm going to say to him, right? We kind of saw, we're putting together the whole conversation before we go meet the person, right? As opposed to just kind of showing up and just letting whatever comes out come out how it comes out, just genuine, organically. The Prophet ﷺ went and saw this man on his deathbed and asked him, Kayfa tajidu? How do you find yourself? Right? And the young man, he replied, he said, Wallahi ya Rasulullah, inni arjullah wa inni akhafu dhunubi. He said, Wallahi, I swear by Allah, O Messenger of Allah, inni arjullah, I hope for Allah's mercy, wa akhafu dhunubi, and I am in fear of my sins. I hope for Allah's mercy, and I am in fear, I am terrified of my sins. See that combination there? I hope for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy. I am in fear. I'm terrified over my sins. And the Prophet ﷺ said, لا يجتمعان في قلب عبد في مثل هذا الموطن إلا أعطاه الله ما يرجو وآمنه ما يخاف. The Prophet subhanallah, so sweet. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, لا يجتمعان في قلب عبد في مثل هذا الموطن. He said, these two qualities are not united in the heart of a servant in this particular circumstance, except that Allah will give you what you hope for and forgive you or give you safety from the thing that you fear. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. What did the young man say? He said, Inni arjullah. He said, Wallahi ya Rasulullah, inni arjullah. Wallahi, I swear by Allah, I hope for Allah's mercy. Wa akhafu dhunubi. And I am in fear of my sin. I'm terrified over my sins. And the Prophet ﷺ said, لا يجتمعان في قلب عبد في مثل هذا الموطن. That these two qualities are not combined in the heart of a servant in a situation like this, except that Allah will give you what you hope for, and He will pardon you and forgive you, or give you safety from the thing that you fear. What am I saying? He said, go back, the point of reference here is the statement of the Prophet ﷺ that these two qualities are not united in the heart of any believing servant, showing you that to hope for Allah's mercy and to be in fear of your sin. That does not put you outside of the realm of being a believer, of fearing Allah. His sin actually made him fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. His sin made him fear. He said, I am in fear. I'm terrified over my sins. So, it's not necessarily true that because a person has fallen victim to sin, or whatever the case may be, to say that the person doesn't fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As a matter of fact, it may be because of the sins that he or she has committed that they actually do fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That they actually do fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we have to get out of this habit of throwing this jargon around, man. You don't fear Allah, or you need to fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Alright, because a person engaged in this sin or that sin or whatever the case may be. Rather, it may be that they actually do fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, especially now since they have engaged in a particular sin. Last issue. Does doing more mean that you fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more? So we're kind of debunking some of these myths that have been passed down generation after generation in the Muslim community. Does it mean that because you do more deeds, right, that you fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more than the next person? Is that what that means? That because you do more, that means that you fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more? That's another issue. That's another misnomer that we have in the Muslim community. We think that because I fast on Mondays and Thursdays, and I'm not talking about the bare minimum, right? Everybody should be doing the basics of Islam. Praying 5 times a day, fasting the month of Ramadan, paying your zakat, making hajj at least once in your lifetime, right? That's the standard. That's the bare minimum. And I'm not comparing the person who, does the bare minimum. I'm talking about a person who doesn't do the bare minimum. They don't even count. They don't even count. You can never say, does a person who doesn't pray, a person who prays, does that make them more righteous than a person that doesn't pray? Absolutely. Not praying makes you a kafir. So how could you even compare the two? Not praying puts you outside of the fold of Islam. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Al-ahdu alladhi baynana wa baynahum as-salah, man tarakaha faqad kafar." That the contract, the agreement between the believer and the disbeliever is the salat. Whoever has abandoned it, then he has disbelieved. He has returned to his origin, has returned to being a disbeliever. Your contract is the salat. Your agreement is that you are going to pray 5 times a day. So I'm not comparing someone who doesn't even do the bare minimum, right? You can't say because a person prays 5 times a day, does that make him better than a person who doesn't pray 5 times a day? Absolutely. You can't say, well, if a sister covers, is she better than a sister who doesn't cover? Absolutely. Absolutely. Does that mean that her character is better than a person? No, because you have some sisters who are mutahajjibat. Some sisters who are mutahajjibat, she covers, she wears hijab, she wears khimar, she wears all of that. But her akhlaq, her adab, her character, her behavior is terrible and totally inconsistent with the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you have some sisters who don't cover, alright, as sinful as that may be, but they have good adab, they have good akhlaq, they're very warm, they're very welcoming, and we're not dismissing that. But in terms of obeying the commandment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to cover your body and wear the hijab, you can never say a woman who wears the hijab is less than a woman who doesn't wear the hijab. No, she's doing the bare minimum. So we're not even using people who don't do the bare minimum as, as a yardstick. We're not even using you. We're not even talking about you. All right? We're talking about, does doing more mean that you fear Allah more? Meaning, if you are doing more than the bare minimum, right? Does that make you more pious or more righteous or more fearful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because you do more? And does that mean that because a person does the bare minimum that they fear Allah less? Understand the question? I'm not talking about because a person does more, because a person prays 5 times a day, they fear Allah more than the person who doesn't pray 5 times a day. Person who doesn't pray 5 times a day is not even included in the equation. You got to work yourself out of the negative first to even be included in the equation. All right? Doing more doesn't necessarily mean that you fear Allah more. Right? We might have a brother who's at the masjid all the time, right? All the time is at the masjid. And usually those type of people are given positions on the board, given positions here or there, whatever the case may be, simply because, mashallah, he's at the masjid all the time. So sometimes we misconstrue that, sometimes we misinterpret that as meaning this person is righteous. This person, mashallah, And then you might have a person who comes to the masjid every now and again because of work, because of family, because of schedule, whatever the case may be, right? And we might look at the person as, man, this guy, he don't even come for Salatul Fajr, right? Or this person, I only see him in the masjid like every now and again, right? Not realizing that, this person may work long hours, this person might be an engineer, this person might be a doctor, spends most of his 24 hours in a hospital, right? But here we go judging the person from the outside simply because we're using this person that's at the masjid all. Did you ever stop to think that if a person is at the masjid all the time, he's either retired or he ain't got a job? Right? And the person that you rarely see could mean that he's always at work. It could mean that he's always at work. Do we ever stop to think about that? The logic that is in that? But we'll judge a brother that doesn't come to the masjid all the time and say like he's, I hardly ever see him at the masjid. And then we'll give praise to a brother and, give, all types of open arm welcoming to a brother who's always in the masjid. If a brother's always in the masjid, then I think something is wrong. He's either retired, and in that case, he's justified, right? He spends his remaining days, in the masjid worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But for a young man to be in the masjid all the time, that's not even fathomable. And this answers the question of why many of our young adults, especially from the ages of 18 to about 31, 32, why they are absent, why that age gap is missing from the masjid. And that's because that's around the time when people establishing careers, people exchanging, moving from different job to job. You don't kind of settle down, especially as a man. Women, you kind of settle down around 26, 27, 28. You start looking to get married, start taking life a little bit more serious, start realizing that your that time frame, that window to have children and still be able to enjoy children and still be able to, get control over your body afterwards is starting to dwindle. That window is starting to, get shorter and shorter. Men, however, we have an extended adolescence in America, so we start taking life a little more serious around 30, 31, 32, 33. Now we're ready to get married, have some children, kind of settle down a little bit, right? But that age gap is not missing from the masjid because they don't want to be at the masjid, or they found other things better to do with themselves. That the older people are constantly judging the young Muslims. Where the young Muslims at? Where they supposed to be at? They supposed to be looking for jobs. We see him in the masjid all the time. We don't even want to talk to him. Why this brother always in the masjid? Why he not out looking for a job somewhere? And then when he's in the masjid, we blaming him for being in the masjid all the time. And when he's out the masjid, we don't see him anymore. Where are these young brothers at? Why they not coming to the masjid? Because he's out looking for a job. Trying to find a career. Trying to get settled. We have to stop being so judgmental, man. The Prophet ﷺ entered the masjid one day and seen a young man sitting in the masjid, mahmoom, you can see traces of anxiety, traces of pain and, hurt, grief. grief-stricken. The Prophet noticed he was in the masjid and it was not time for salat. The Prophet was wise. What is a young man doing sitting in the masjid and it's not time for prayer? Right? Even during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, that was considered abnormal. The Sahaba didn't just sit around in the masjid all day long. You go to some of the masajids, you see brothers, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. He's sitting on the musalla, on his laptop, on his cell phone. It's like, why are you sitting in the masjid? Why are you in the masjid? When I was the imam at 15th Street, I came downstairs one day from my office onto the musalla floor. I forgot what I came down there for. It was like after Dhuhr. And his brother's on the musalla and he's, fixing his oil bottles on the musalla. And I just walked past and then I stopped. I said, nah, I gotta say something. So I walked past and I said, did somebody authorize you to, do your bottling up your bottles for oils? Did somebody give you permission to do that on the musalla? He said, no. I said, this is not the place for that. This is a musalla. This is a place for prayer, place for reading Quran, and making dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Exactly what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam identified the purpose of the masjid for. It's not the place for that, man. Find somewhere else. Go in the Dunkin' Donuts. Go in the McDonald's somewhere. Go somewhere where you can do that. That's acceptable behavior. In the masjid, that is not acceptable behavior. So as I'm walking away, he said, Brother Imam, he said, you studied in the university. I said, yeah. He said, how do I get in the university? I want to get in the university. I said, well, before we talk about the university, I said, do you have a high school diploma? He was like, no. I said, how old are you? It's like 27, 28. I'm like, how are you 27, 28? You don't have a high school diploma. And you asking me about going to the Islamic university. Man, get your high school diploma first, man. And then come talk to me, man. Don't talk to me about going to no university to go study Islam. And you don't even have the basics. The basics of a formal education that will, going to the Islamic university is going to add to the basic education that you already have. Not to mention you can't get into the Islamic university without a high school diploma. Come on, man. We majoring in the minor, minoring in the major. Are you asking me about going to the Islamic university and you don't even got a high school diploma? You sitting on the musalla at 2 o'clock in the afternoon bottling up oils. Unacceptable, man. Unacceptable. But we find fault with the brothers that are on the musalla all the time for being on the musalla and not looking for a job. And then when they're out working, then we find fault with them for not being in the masjid. We need to make our minds up. What do you want? You want them to be on the musalla? You don't want them to be on? They got to be a middle course here. Anyway, the Prophet ﷺ saw the young man on the musalla, and you can see signs of grief on him. And the Prophet asked him, what's wrong with you? And he said, Ya Rasulullah, alayya duyun. I have so many debts. I have so many debts, right? Because debt will do that to you. And the Prophet ﷺ said, can I teach you something that will help you, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will satisfy your debt for you? And he said, yes, absolutely. And the Prophet ﷺ taught him the dua, Allahumma qdi anni dayni. Oh Allah, don't give another human being authority over me and satisfy my debts for me, right? And the young man was not seen on the musalla after that. Obviously, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answered his dua. All right? But doing more doesn't necessarily mean that you fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more. And I'm going to stop at that point. I'm going to answer this when we come back, inshallah ta'ala, probably Saturday. Inshallah. Saturday. I'll answer that, which I believe is the day of Arafah, which is the recommended day of fasting, bi'ithnillahi ta'ala. We should be fasting the whole 10 days of Dhul Hijjah if we can. All right? As I mentioned before, there are no good deeds that are done in any days that are more beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than the good deeds that are done in the first 10 days of Dhul Hijjah. So we'll stop here, inshallah ta'ala. I'll open up a chat for a few minutes for questions and answers, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa salama tasliman kathira. Wa akhiru da'wana anil hamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.